Viewers, today in this edition of Crux, we are going to focus on a geostrategic issue. We're going to focus on our neighbor China. Can China choke off a major share of India's water originating from the Tibetan Autonomous Region to parch Indians, wreck agricultural productivity and stir unprecedented unrest in the vulnerable eastern sector of the country? This question is necessitated by reports that Beijing is planning to build a number of dams in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, or TAR, to weaponize water and gain leverage over India. Let me take you through the details of the plan. They will be easily visible to you also, viewers, in summation on your screens. China has been strategically investing on dam construction to weaponize water for its lower riparian neighbors. China has set aside $50 billion to strategically invest on the construction of 5 dams in the TAR. China has already constructed approximately 87,000 dams, including significant projects on the Mekong and Brahmaputra rivers. A map of that we will show you in just a few moments. China's plan to construct 7 dams along the Brahmaputra river has raised concerns in India and Bangladesh, where the river is crucial for agriculture. We all know this. The Chinese 14th five-year plan, which extends from 2021 to 2025, which is next year, emphasizes developing hydropower on the Brahmaputra. China claims these dams will operate as, quote, run of the river, unquote, projects, minimizing upstream water storage. The Zhangmu Dam, operational since 2015, was China's first hydropower project on this river, followed by the ongoing construction of the Dagu, Zhishu, and Jiasha dams. The Medog Dam, operational since 2023, is located just 30 kilometers from the Indian border. The Yarlung Sangpo River, known as the Brahmaputra in India, is essential for India's northeastern water supply, with dependence estimates ranging from 77 to 40%. If you haven't already figured it out, let me simplify the news for you in 2 short takeaways. Though China denies any intention of hurting India's sovereign interests, many experts are advising against taking the dragon at face value. Why? Because China's control over water resources originating from Tibet has profound geopolitical and environmental implications for downstream countries such as India. Damming rivers originating from Tibet gives Beijing geographical leverage, which has been perceived as a means for China to exert influence. There's even now a word for it, and it's called hydrohegemony. Viewers, let's open this up. Let's ask some basic questions. If water is going to be weaponized, if the Chinese are going to do this, can they shut the tap on India? How real is the threat from China? Let's ask some of these fundamental questions. Joining us this evening is Brahma Chileni. He needs no introduction. He's strategic affairs analyst. Sushant Sareen, who's an expert in the region, and Andrew K.P. Leung, who joins us from Hong Kong. Now, Mr. Chileni, let's first try and put into perspective this term that is increasingly being used, hydrohegemony. What should we take away from it?
Rahul, there is no doubt that China is the undisputed hydrohegemon of Asia. When it occupied Tibet, the water tower of Asia, in the early 1950s, it changed the water map of an entire continent. Israel changed the water map of its sub-region in a 6-day war in 1967. But China, by annexing Tibet, changed the water map of the entire Asian region. China has 12 downstream neighbors. India is only one of them. And in more recent years, as its own domestic rivers in Han China have become dam saturated, some of the rivers, in fact, are dying, including the Yellow River, which is the cradle of Chinese civilization, Chinese dam builders have started focusing on the international rivers that originate on the Tibetan plateau. And it's not just against India. It's been weaponizing water, even against countries that are traditionally very pro-China. Consider Thailand, Laos, Cambodia. By building 11 mega dams on the Mekong River, just before the Mekong enters Southeast Asia, it has been causing recurrent droughts in downstream Mekong basin. Now, if China cannot spare Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia, certainly India is not at least in Chinese perspective, not a friend of China. So obviously they will try to leverage water against India. But if they do what they are planning to do, in fact, they are already building the world's biggest dam on the Brahmaputra at Meetok. This will be 3 times larger dam than the Three Gorges Dam, which is currently the world's largest. But the biggest brunt of what China is doing on the Brahmaputra will be borne not by Northeast India, but by Bangladesh, which is located furthest downstream on the Brahmaputra. And the Brahmaputra is the source of water for Bangladesh in a major way. 52% of Bangladesh's water comes from the Brahmaputra River. So when you build this super dam on the Brahmaputra, you're going to cause downstream havoc, especially in Bangladesh, leading to environmental refugees flocking to India. India is already home to millions of illegally settled Bangladeshis. But what China is doing is going to cause environmental refugees, and these refugees will have only one way to go, to enter into India.
So in just a few moments, viewers, we're going to ask or enter the second part of this debate, which will be the fallout in India. But I want to bring in Sushant Sareen as well as Andrew K.P. Leung. Sushant Sareen, we have had water treaties with a belligerent nation to our west like Pakistan. In fact, the only real standing treaty between the two countries right now, which has acquired a certain inviolability, is the one with Pakistan. The problem on the eastern front with China is that China considers transboundary rivers as sovereign resources, from the little that I have actually gathered, and opposes international conventions. This A, reveals something about their mindset, and B, talks a little bit about the challenge that we have in trying to bridge this gap with China.
So, Rahul, what we did on the western side was actually an act of magnanimity, which we should not have done. And as a result, we've tied our hands, because even for the benefit of the state or the union territory from which those rivers flow, we cannot cater to their needs. So there is that issue out there, and I don't know whether we should have been that magnanimous or not. And it's inviolable, not for any other reason, but because it's subject to international arbitration, which you cannot escape. The Chinese have not fallen for that, so that's our bad luck. But there is also no other international law. Look, international law in any case is a work of fiction. International law is basically how powerful you are. If you are powerful, you have the law with you. If you are not, there is no law. That's the unvarnished truth about international relations. And the Chinese feel no need to enter into any international treaty. So there is that one problem which we have. But I think on the flip side, look at it the other way. Tibet is ultimately a plateau. If you are going to build some dams out there, how are you going to, take the water upstream? You can build a run-of-the-river project, which really does not affect water flows, number one. Number two, even if you were to impound all the waters, what are you going to do with it? Because pumping up that water upstream is a horrendously expensive exercise, unless, of course, the Chinese want to be bloody-minded about it, and they can be. But even then, from the hydrological statistics which we have, almost 70% to 80% of the Brahmaputra water's catchment area lies within Indian territory. So to some extent, it will certainly affect the water flows in the Brahmaputra. And as we develop our own water resources, some of the flows into Bangladesh will certainly start getting reduced. So we'll have to be careful on that count for the reasons, as Brahma very correctly points out, that if you have a situation in Bangladesh where the country stops becoming viable, agriculture becomes unproductive, you will have a refugee crisis on your borders, and we're already seeing some of it already unfold before our very eyes. So there is that factor. On the Mekong and other places, again, I'll defer to what Brahma has said. But keep in mind also the fact that the Chinese have built dams on the river Indus. Now, the Pakistanis keep talking to us and dragging us to the international court and for neutral experts to World Bank and what have you on our commitments to Indus Waters Treaty. But their iron brother has been making dams on the river Indus, which have interdicted flows in the river Indus, which flow into Pakistan, and the Pakistanis have not been able to do a damn thing about it. So there are clearly there are going to be these problems as we go forward, and we have to try and see how best we can deal with it, short of a conflict. But that is the reality as we face it.
Andrew K.P. Leung, let me ask you this, because China has refused to sign the 1997 UN Convention on the Law of the Non-Navigational Uses of International Watercourses, which promotes cooperative management of transboundary rivers. We know this. And I have to ask you, is this an indication that China's water diplomacy, lack of a better word, is coercive? It is not cooperative, but coercive.
Well, water is a common resource that affects many countries. Let's not forget that if you Google, you'll find that India also is building a lot of dams. India is the world's third largest dam builder, with over 5,000 dams in operation, and 400 more dams are being built. And it affects, of course, dams affect the downstream countries. For example, the river in the Indus River, in the Ganges River, would affect the delta regions downstream. And of course, the water from the Himalayas, it feeds through China, it feeds through northeast India, and all the way affecting the ecosystems. So I think that accusing China of weaponizing it is the pot calling the kettle black. The fact remains that water is a common resource, and of course it needs to be utilized, especially in this state of decarbonization. It's a good resource, but I think it affects cross-border systems. And as for kind of diplomacy, for example, in the neighboring country, Bangladesh, and in the Teesta river basin, and of course that Bangladesh is subject to the water influence from India. So I think that all countries have got to be aware of these geopolitical or bilateral kind of relationship, because the water flows through different countries. Now, I think that the world should, in this state of climate change, with drought and also ecological degradation affecting livelihoods of millions of people, I think countries should really not try to lay the blame on each other and try to cooperate and manage these huge problems. As I said, because of climate change, water becomes a scarcer and scarcer natural resource affecting billions of people in different countries.
Okay, yes, Sushant Sareen, you were raising your hand. You wanted to make a point.
Yeah, because I think there's a certain amount of misrepresentation by Mr. K.P. Leung on the Indian projects. For example, on the Indus River system, the projects that are being made by India on the western rivers are all run-of-the-river projects. However, and which we are entitled to make under the treaty provisions. The only problem in that case is that when the treaty was signed and since then technology has developed, we've learned new things on how to better manage these projects. What was happening is that the projects which we had milled earlier, because of silting, had a very limited shelf life. So The new projects which we have started building have certain provisions to ensure that the silting does not take place and the length, the life of the projects increases. The Pakistanis, however, stick to the letter of the law and want that the old designs should continue to carry till time immemorial and till eternity rather. And that is where the disputes are coming, because all those projects that we are building on the western rivers flowing into Pakistan are all run of the river projects. We cannot hold the water, because if we hold the water, there's nowhere we can transport that water to. So even if we are building a navigation project, the water is taken from one place and thrown back into the river at another place. So there is really nothing for the Pakistanis to crib about except for bloody-mindedness. Again, on the eastern side, on the Gangetic river system, the projects which we have built, most of them, almost all of them, are actually run-of-the-river projects. These are meant for generating hydroelectricity. Very few and very limited irrigation facilities have been created on those things, simply because the terrain does not allow you to create irrigation facilities in many of those cases. So I think the misrepresentation by Mr. Lewing had to be corrected out here itself.
So, Mr. Leung, you're drawing a false equivalence and suggesting that the pot is calling the kettle black. I think that record has been set straight. But I'll come back to you. Let me bring back Mr. Chileni. Just give me. Okay, well, fine. We can all agree to disagree. But on this particular point, on facts, sir, you'll have to accept the situation as it has been described by Mr. Sareen. He is not misleading anybody. He's representing it as it is. Yes, okay, Mr. Lang, you want to come in? Yes, okay. Go ahead.
Well, I think that it's correct that India may be building the dams for hydroelectric power and has a number of safeguards. But I think that it's also true that its neighbor, for example, Pakistan and some other countries may not share the same view. But likewise, China is building dams not for nothing. It's also for hydroelectric power. And of course, the water from the Himalayas feeds not only the western part of China, but it's going to feed the regions further inland. Okay. So I think the countries build dams.
Well, it's not as simple as that. It's not as if China is a very benign power. And that's why I wanted to bring in Mr. Chileni, and then we can talk a little bit about China's outlook, larger parts of the world. China's expansionism, Mr. Chileni, its devil-may-care attitude towards international convention and territorial sovereignty makes it very suspect. I'm sorry, it doesn't have the greatest record.
The unfortunate part is that Chinese people are paying the cost of the Chinese Communist Party's ongoing efforts since 1949 to bend nature to man's will. This has been an ongoing project since Mao's time. Bend nature to man's will, which is the reason why the rivers in Han China are dying today, including the Yellow River. To make matters worse, China has turned its back on international customs, on international norms, and even has turned its back on the sole international water law that we have, the 1997 International Water Coast Convention. But look at the bigger picture. India has water sharing treaties, not just agreements, treaties with both the countries located downstream to it, Pakistan and Bangladesh. The treaty with Pakistan remains the world's most generous water sharing treaty, both in terms of the percentage of water left for the downstream country, which is more than 80% of the entire water of the sixth river Indus system, and also in terms of the total quantity of water left for Pakistan. The total quantity of water left for Pakistan is many, many times greater than the next most generous water sharing treaty, which is between the US and Mexico. And India also has a water sharing treaty with Bangladesh, which set a new principle in international water law. It guarantees Bangladesh a specified quantity of water, even in the dry season. which means that if there is a shortfall in the river flow in the driest part of the year, India has to bear the brunt because of this arrangement. But China, despite having at least 12 downstream neighbors, it does not have a single water sharing treaty with any downstream neighbor, nor does it have an institutionalized collaboration on any transnational river with a downstream country. So no water sharing, no
treaty,
no institutionalized collaboration.
Yes, exactly, Mr. Liang, and that really is what makes China so suspect in everyone's eyes. I mean, you have to go to Thailand, you have to go to Laos. You are seeing already the effect of deprivation, water deprivation from China on those countries, especially in their northern regions where there have been droughts. And yet China doesn't want to sign treaties or stand as guarantor. That says a lot, doesn't it, Mr. Leong?
Of course, China is not exactly sort of shunting away from the negotiations and talks to manage the water resources, and these negotiations and talks have been.
So why hasn't it signed a treaty
between? Well, I mean, the treaty, of course, must be signed agreeable to both countries. It's not just imposed on China, because water is a national security issue. Because even though China is the second largest country in terms of population, but then China is a water-stressed country. Its water availability is only a third of the world's average, including sub-Saharan Africa. So water is a huge national security issue for China. And a lot of the water depends on the water from the Himalayas, as I said. So I think the management of the waters from the Himalayas is a highly sensitive.
Well, viewers, that doesn't preclude a treaty. A treaty is signed in the spirit of give and take. And if if China doesn't want to give and only wants to take, you're not going to have, viewers, a treaty. And that is also one of the reasons why. Well, it's not. It's a fact, sir. There is no treaty. There are a large number of countries who don't see eyeball to eyeball but have treaties. They manage to set aside their, I suppose, constraints. Anyhow, I'm not here to lecture anybody. Viewers, till the Chinese don't come out there and willfully sign treaties with their neighbors, they're going to remain suspect, and people have the right then to suspect their intentions. I leave it at this, viewers. I'm not going to take a position on this. You've heard all sides. A lot more coming up right after the break.